Hello and welcome to a little bit of a follow-up video to the previous one I did yesterday on the third, I guess. Well, it's kind of the second, but also the third Victoria 3 Dev Diary talking about capacities. Now, when I record these Dev Diary videos, especially with the Victoria ones, they are often quite soon after they're posted. Especially with Victoria, they come out at 7 o'clock for me. I then need to get my kid to sleep at 8 o'clock, and then I have multiplayer shenanigans to do at 10 o'clock. So I don't really have time to wait until I'm, free to do these videos. And also I don't have time to wait for the developer responses. It's just a little bit of an awkward time for me, not gonna lie. But what we can do then is just go over the responses afterwards, and there are some responses, there's some community feedback that I do think is worth exploring. So first off, I'm bringing you to Martin Anward's Twitter account, where obviously Martin is the game director for Victoria 3, and he retweeted this from One Power Bavarian. I'll go into it here. I don't think the new Victoria 3 capacities fit the definition of mana, even with his personal stricter definition than the one of the devs, but authority is somewhat close in my eyes. Why am I maintaining roads with my authority? And you can see here, with the authority that we saw, you get road maintenance in Svealand and road maintenance in Götaland, and that is paid for by authority. So obviously this is a little bit of an edge case when it comes to what is and isn't mana for Bavarian. And we have the response here from Martin. In short, road maintenance here refers to a specific degree where the ruler tells people in the state to keep the roads in working order. There's a whole separate infrastructure system that does not use authority. This is just one of the pet projects that authority allows. So, can authority pet projects be compared to national focuses, but revamped and oriented towards specific playstyles rather than general statewide ability to fit all playstyles? Martin responds that generally you'll have some authority unless you're a total anarchist utopia, but other than that, it's a fair assessment. All right, that satisfied Bavarian, so that's perfectly fine. It's an authoritarian way of forcing local populace and governors to do something for you, like maintaining roads. Yes, that's perfectly reasonable, I think. As well, with capacities in general, I don't think, I mean, it's not a resource that you're accumulating over time and then spending, so I don't think it fits the definition there. I would say I also have a relatively stricter definition of mana than the devs do, but I don't think this would count towards that. The roads did sort of catch me a little bit as well, though. Alright, that is that. We also have this one here. Just a small clarification on today's Victoria 3 Dev Diary. Buildings do not provide a benefit on their own in Victoria 3. You always need qualified pops to work in them. An empty building is useless, even if it's a port or a railroad. This is essentially talking about the Bureaucracy building, which I should just open up here and have a look at it in here. So the bureaucracy is increased by having a government administration in Svealand, and that's not technically true. What it is instead is having bureaucrats working your bureaucratic building in Svealand, is how you're increasing your bureaucracy there. If you have a building and it is unworked, you are not going to receive any benefit from them, which is entirely reasonable. I do think there is a little bit of an issue here with all these numbers are a bit too rounded, right? 150 from a government administration in Svealand. It's a little bit too clean. It doesn't really feel like a value that can maybe get, bigger or smaller depending on how well your bureaucrats are being treated. Maybe they're looking for some luxury furniture and some luxury clothes, and that would make them happier and more productive and more efficient at their job. And these numbers could go up and down just a smudge, not not by like tons of amounts, unless they're like, you know, the aristocrats or the bureaucrats here are literally destitute, but just a little bit of variance, so it's not just these round numbers, because it just feels too clinical, too clean, too cynical, I guess. But yeah, that's another thing that Martin said about that. Right, and we also have some dev comments underneath the actual dev diary itself. So, major powers is his name for secondary powers, although the advantages they get compared to minor powers are a bit different from Victoria 2. So, yeah, we have the three, I guess, kinds of names. We've got the great powers, we've got major powers, and we get minor powers. We don't have secondary powers anymore, and I guess that is where people are being a little bit caught up. Mr. Knight here says the Battle of Königgrätz at the top. On the dev diary itself, with the mention of authority being drawn in representation of the head of state, how does authority function in countries like Norway, which is a personal union? What about when you unite something like Scandinavia? Also, I see secondary powers are now major powers, or maybe major powers is just everyone above a certain point, which technically includes great powers, but they're also another class in and of themselves. So yeah, he's just confirming or clarifying, I guess, what the powers system is. Is influence affected by the nation you're using it on? For example, I think influencing a weak nation should cost less than a great power. I also think a communist country, for instance, should find it harder to influence a conservative monarchy, and vice versa. Yes, cost varies on factors like rank, threat, etc. Notice he doesn't say government type. I would have expected him to say government type if it was there. Because, yeah, this is a really good idea. Communist countries should not have as much influence in a conservative monarchy as another conservative monarchy would. Maybe monarchies would be a little bit more dismissive of non-monarchies, for instance. I do think that would be something good to add to the game, but as it hasn't been stated here, I mean, there is an etc., right? There is an etc., but I do think that maybe it's not in the game as it stands. Maybe it will be. Maybe this comment is enough to spur that addition. Things like prestige as well. The higher prestige would not care so much for the lower prestige, and the lower prestige would find it harder to influence the higher prestige. That could also be a thing. There's multiple things you could add in there to influence it. But I think government type is a big one that I hadn't thought of, and that would be nice to have there. It looks from the description in the picture that the bureaucratic capacity is based on government administration building and not the number of bureaucrats working there. Or if you have the building but no bureaucratic pops, it scales to the available workforce. If an empty building doesn't provide any benefits, yeah, we saw that already. I guess it's just maybe that should have been clarified a bit more in the dev diary first, but yeah, it is what it is. I can't catch everything before it's uploaded, but yeah, that's just further clarification there. If you get more authority from being authoritarian, then what does a non-authoritarian society get in exchange? Generally speaking, non-authoritarian societies, so we're thinking like, you know, anarchists and stuff, more rights and equality mean happier, healthier, and wealthier pups with all the benefits that brings. Makes sense. But no roads. No road maintenance. Maybe there's a different way of maintaining your roads if you don't use authority. Having two ways. Maybe you can pay for it yourself. Who knows? Something, perhaps. There are several other things in Vicky 2. Colonial power and diplomatic influence, both you can increase by building ships and technology. So, colonial power is an institution you invest into in Victoria 3. Interesting. That's the first we've actually heard of that. And colonizing requires ports and fleets. I like that. That is a really fun system in Victoria 2. Obviously, we'll see more on that later. But it's good to see that, you know, this colonial powers system is returning from Victoria 2, because I did think that was quite a fun part of the game, quite innovative. I liked it. It was good. But on topic, but the money being presented as a capacity seems intriguing. It's not really being presented as a capacity. Does it mean money will work the same way and countries won't be able to accumulate it? No. The money is shown at the top bar next to the capacities, but works like you'd expect a treasury to work. The bar being red means you're halfway towards your credit limit. The positive balance means you are slowly paying your loans off. The fact they're rendered exactly the same way right now is admittedly confusing and will definitely be fixed. So these are the kinds of things that is good to catch in the dev diaries. people being confused that money looks like a capacity, we can actually have a look at what the money looks like. It's actually just at the top bar, right? There. It looks like it's a capacity, right? You've got a bar. You're expecting, okay, I'm about halfway towards the end of the bar. If I get to the end of the bar, what does that mean? If you're looking at these capacities, it means you are at the maximum amount of your capacity. This is, diplomatic one, influence is 100% of the excess, so it's reached the end of the bar. So having a bar here makes it look like that is sort of the case here as well. Money is not a capacity, though. You can go over and the bar being red. Is it red in any of these images? I don't see that. I don't see the bar being red, but it's yellow. I guess it would be red if it goes closer there. It just means you are halfway towards your credit limit. So I guess we're looking at things like loans again. So if you reach the full amount of your credit limit, maybe some bankruptcy things are going on. Positive balance mean you're paying your loans off. So yeah, this is the amount of credit you can take. You're halfway towards the amount of loans you can take. You're making money. I would like to see pence as well. So, £673 and X amount of pence. Or I guess maybe not, because you'll probably eventually need to have the K on there instead. I don't know. It would be nice to see something, because just round numbers just don't really do it for me. I don't know, it doesn't feel Vicky to me. But anyway, this is not a capacity. You can have as much money as you want, and this is to show loan amounts that you have. But yeah, it does look somewhat similar here. It does look a little bit confusing, so that will be something that will be changed. We're going to dive more into buildings next week. Good to know. But you can think of a building like a government administration as essentially creating the offices, logistics, etc. for your bureaucrats. Without it, they just can't do their jobs. But you still need qualified, literate pops to take these jobs. And without them, it's just an empty complex doing nothing. All buildings work like this in Victoria 3. So definitely that is something interesting. All buildings work like that. If they are empty, they do nothing. Good. Including ports and railroads, which did not need POPs to function in Victoria 2. You need to employ POPs to construct things for you in Victoria 3. That is super cool. That is amazing. I actually love that. Having a labor force, right? And it basically means that if you're not constructing something, you're going to have unemployment. Or if you've got no unemployment in your entire country, you've been doing really well, but you want to build something, well, I mean, you're going to have to pull POPs from somewhere. Maybe there can be a way of importing labor, maybe from China, to build your railroads or something like that. That could be a thing. But yeah, that is really interesting. It's going to make, being 0% unemployment is going to be a negative, as is being, massively unemployed. Because, if you've got no unemployment and you want to build something, where are your laborers? You don't have any because they're employed in a factory somewhere. So I think that has more... There's more depth to it than it is first apparent. It really is. I love this. That gets a like. Can I ask you if buildings take a slot of some sort? Some buildings are limited by resource or arable land. For example, iron mines are limited by how much iron is available in the region, but only where it makes sense. How large your cities can grow is really only limited by your population. So basically, worried that the system from EU4 maybe is going to be a thing where, I've got a few more POPs. Population, development, whatever. I can unlock another building slot, and building slots are terrible garbage. So yeah, that doesn't seem to be the case. So limited by resources and arable land, arable land is of course how much you can farm there. So you can't build like a ton of farms when there's not enough farmland. Like you're not going to really be building, orchards upon farmlands upon cattle pastures in Sinai or in the Suez. So that makes sense. How they limited that is going to be interesting, though. Yeah, hopefully we don't see a return of the building slot system, because that's just shit. Moving on. Road maintenance thing is sort of interesting. Is authority being used like you're like demanding with your kingly powers and decrees that road maintenance shall be done? That's how I read it, rather than it being the maintenance itself taking your authority for some reason. That's the idea, yes. The king exercising his personal power on pet projects. So we can imagine other kind of pet projects will be a part of this as well. I would say rail maintenance probably shouldn't work this way. Maybe rail maintenance should be an expense of your train stations that you're going to be building. Of course, because you have to construct railways. And train stations are a building, right? Railroads need POPs. All buildings work like this in ports and railroads. Railroads do need POPs to work in them. They also need resources like coal, for example, to function. So maybe when you get up to railroads would be maintained as a function of that. Maybe roads just didn't have anything of that sort. And what I was thinking of with road maintenance wasn't just like, oh, I'm going to fix some potholes. It was also a case of, having the roads policed. So I don't know how much banditry and stuff was a thing in this era. I imagine it'd be more a thing in the less developed kind of states, where, your roads would be your primary method of transport. But what I'm thinking as well is, with these capacities, if we go back up to authority, this is a lot of authority on 2 provinces. If we're looking at, for example, France in Victoria 2, there is a lot of these state-level, areas, with 5 or 6 provinces within them. If it's 200 per state, so a state consisting of a few provinces, you're gonna be spending like 1,000 on road maintenance in France. So that price has to change. The fact that it is again another round number probably doesn't mean anything, because numbers change. That is like the thing that changes the most as development goes on. But the fact that they are equal, identical, and so round is a bit worrying, right? There should be maybe differences based on how efficient the bureaucracy is, or efficient your state power is in each area. There should be differences based on how many people live in each area. And also just how efficient your state is, right? Because otherwise, as France, you are going to have no authority. Absolutely none, because everything's going to go on to road maintenance. I wonder if you can turn off road maintenance, right? You can turn off road maintenance, or you can specifically say, I want you to maintain the roads here and here, and then the others will slowly deteriorate. That could be a thing. But, the idea of maintaining every single road is just insane. And the fact that it costs more to maintain a single road than it does to put taxes on a single trade good is also insane to me. I'm still not completely sold on road maintenance being in here, but it makes I can see the logic behind it now, which is nice. I'm just not sure I like it. I hope this comes from social reforms, though. If someone was forced to choose between living in a rich country that's an absolute monarchy and a poor country that is a perfect democracy, pretty sure people pick the rich country. Voting rights don't directly increase the wealth of pops. They do give them the ability to push for social reforms that benefit them, which they may in turn mean the player is able to get those reforms passed. Okay. Alright. It's not clear just from this screenshot, but freedom of assembly is a law. Alright, freedom of assembly, we'll find that. There's a right of assembly and freedom of conscience. These, I guess, are laws. They're in the free speech category of laws, which culminates in protected speech. As the most liberal law in this category, it grants no authority, while more repressive laws, like freedom of assembly, do. In isolation from the rest of the game, of course, that means it looks like granting your people rights increases your authority, but it's actually the opposite of what is happening. Okay. So people are thinking, why do you get more authority from the right of assembly? But it's in fact the opposite way around, where the base amount of authority you get from this right of assembly, like the up in the tree, is like 500, and then as you're passing more laws, you're getting less and less and less. So you're only getting plus 50 from right of assembly, and then when you finally get to protected speech, you'd get none. That makes sense. I like it. Okay. Right now, it looks like you're granting your people rights, increases your authority. That's not the case. Good. Also, this is of course not the only thing the free speech laws govern. There's other effects of the laws as well, which provide trade-offs to your country, but this is the only effect it has on authority. And again, talking about road maintenance, the reason why it uses authority is because it's a decree issued in a state to its population and doesn't cost the government anything other than authority to ensure its people are following its directives. It's a pretty early game solution to maintaining a good market connection in a few states at a time. More effective means of leveraging your economy to ensure cohesion between states tends to emerge late in the game. I would imagine, the railways, again, maintaining their own tracks. Freeing up your authority for things like suppressing your political opponents or, granting your people more rights. That's how you want to go about it. Gotcha. Okay, cool. Does this mean even in absolute monarchies, a player can just enact reforms on a whim? Granted, one czar got assassinated for abolishing serfdom, as far as I know, but still. Absolute monarchs never actually had absolute power. I don't remember what it was, but I do recall watching a video that made the claim that absolute monarchies, like the French monarchy before the Revolution, actually had less power than constitutional monarchies, because what absolute monarchies had to do was leverage their power through the nobility, and the nobility would all be like, okay, what are you going to give me in return for me to back your play here? So while it was an absolute monarchy, one person still can't leverage that control without aid from, well, in this case, the nobility, and a constitutional monarchy was a lot less about giving favors to nobility, so it actually had more power, and it was able to leverage that power in a much more efficient way. So an absolute monarch without a power base is not going to remain a monarch for much longer. It would perhaps be interesting to always allow laws to attempt to be passed by an absolute monarch, but realistically, if all power is held by the landowners, trying to pass universal suffrage should result in a rapid coup. Yeah, exactly. All the power is held within the nation, and I need to turn down the music because that was a loud song. Yeah, if the power in an absolute monarchy isn't all held by the absolute monarch, he has supporters, and you can't piss those supporters off. Absolute monarchs never have absolute power. What about Bonapartism? What about it? Bonapartism is an example of a monarch exercising absolute power over conflicts of classes. For example, the Second Empire is Napoleon III, a constitutional monarch, an absolute monarch, or a presidential dictatorship. Absolute monarch is only absolute so long as there's enough people agreeing that he's absolute. If the entire army decides to disagree, well, the title doesn't mean much anymore. Exactly. He's, yeah. I already said it up here, you said it again. Yeah, there's not really much more to go from there. What you get influence from? Primarily your rank, which is determined by prestige, which is determined by a combination of other factors. In other words, the more impressive or terrifying the rest of the world thinks you are, the more leeway you get in pushing your weight around on the world stage. There are other potential sources of influence as well, which also makes sense, given what influence is used for. We absolutely do not want you to feel like the way you get a resource has no relation to how you allocate the resource. Of course, this is part of my definition on what is and is not mana. The disconnect between the generation and the spending is wider the gap, the more likely it is to fit into a definition of mana. I really need to do a definition of mana video at some point. Not today. It's not just pressing create government building and hop. Bureaucrats will pop out. They'll most probably need to be purchasing different goods as office supplies as well to perform properly, otherwise they won't. Correct, both people and goods like paper needs to run your bureaucracy. Yeah, which makes it all the more strange that the number was so round, but maybe that's just a work in progress kind of thing. Late game democratic governments should in fact have close to equal, if not more, authority than early game absolute monarchies, if we're going historically speaking, of course. If you go with the board game mindset, then asymmetric design makes more sense. Autocrats, or anyone with a great deal of personal power, can do things in a way that cuts through red tape. That's basically what authority is representing. It's meant to be a trade-off, but also simulate a very real effect. This is a good point, actually. I think people are hung up on absolute monarchies as this pinnacle of kings say do jump and you jump. And it's just really not the case, because, if your nobles don't want to jump, then, well, we'll just get a new absolute monarch then, won't we? Is bureaucracy capacity equal how much money you invest? See, it sounds like if you have enough money to afford administration building and the bureaucrat salary, you can have as many bureaucratic capacity as you want. I'm worried that when you get everything on track in the mid-game and have stable income, bureaucratic capacity will never be a problem. And Wiz replies, the need for bureaucracy scales upwards with higher incorporated population, especially if you want to run social programs. You're essentially paying for every pop you want to educate, provide healthcare for, etc. As the example given, it's extremely expensive to just govern China. Provide it with solid infrastructure and social programs. It's meant to be a Herculean undertaking. Yeah, I mean, the example we have here is Sweden, right? Sweden probably shouldn't be too terribly large and painful to administrate, bureaucracy-wise. But it is. It is. Of course, their education system is pretty good, still is today. Oh, it's interesting. You can see the flag behind. Nice, you got a bit of... that's not Denmark, is that? I don't know what kind of flag we're looking at here. Whatever, it doesn't matter. But yeah, Sweden starts with a very high literacy rate, so maybe that is why their education is a bit higher than maybe it otherwise would be. But otherwise, Sweden is not a terribly large nation on the world stage. So it's interesting that it is difficult to administrate. If you're looking at somewhere like Japan with a much, much higher population and an equally, literate nation, I imagine Japan is going to be very, very difficult to bureaucratically administrate. Yeah, China's going to be a fucking pain as well. Will bureaucracy usage grow linearly with the number of states and pops, or be an upward curve? Will large states like China and Russia need to allocate a larger share of resources to bureaucracy than, say, Serbia, everything else being equal? Will it make blobbing beyond a certain point prohibitively expensive? And will the mechanic apply to colonial states? So, bureaucracy usage scales with the number of people you administrate. Providing education to 1 million people is 10 times more expensive than providing it to 100,000 people. There's also a flat cost per incorporated state to represent the difficulties in governing large territories, even if those territories are depopulated. So it is linear, but also, yeah, if... the spread of pops is also taken into account there as well. It's harder to administrate 100,000 in 20 provinces than it is to administer 100,000 in one province, because you won't have the extra strain on, flat cost per incorporated state. So that makes sense. I like that. And I imagine we're talking colonial states won't be incorporated states. Right? They won't be that, so they won't apply there. That makes sense. I like that. And finally, our last one. It's now worked in Vic 2. Railroads and naval bases required resources, lumber, steel, cement, etc. to build, not to maintain. Monetary cost is the price of purchasing these goods, and it varied depending on the market price, and sometimes these goods are not available at all to your nation. In Victoria 3, it seems they're adding hiring construction workers an additional input to building construction costs. He's probably replying to someone else there. Building costs, goods to construct, which good depends on the method of construction used. If you're building, say, wooden or steel and glass buildings, which are subject to market prices and impact the market in turn. So yeah, just more complexity involved in building these buildings. And then finally, we've got this one here as well, talking again about mana. Developers should never fall into the trap by saying they don't have mana. They gave credibility to a meaningless complaint based on a snarl world whose definition changes arbitrarily. I really need to make that mana video. Paradox makes grand strategy games. Grand strategy games are going to have abstractions in them. How good these abstractions are should individually be judged on their own merits and not based on if someone calls it mana or not. I mean, they're not. And I imagine the people who are like raging about this in the way that Kimesdale here is, are mostly taking the worst examples of people who don't like mana and not really giving credit to the people who actually have a point. Like myself. And yeah, reply here is, see your point, but at the same time, we didn't want the first couple of weeks of discussion about Victoria 3 to just be an endless debate on whether or not there would be mana in the game, which is likely what would have happened if we'd said nothing on the subject. Ultimately, though, everyone has their own definition of the word. Yeah, that's the problem. And I think the more relevant point is what degree of abstraction is suitable for each particular game. In Victoria 3, we're striving for more grounded mechanics in general, which is something I am totally in for. Yeah, I really need to give whatever. But yeah, that's a bit more of a video on talking about the responses. That's almost as long as the fucking original video, so it's I certainly wouldn't have had time to do this when I made the original video. So yeah, hope you didn't mind the the addendum, Dave Diary 2.1, I guess. But yeah, thank you all very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this one. I hope you enjoyed some of the developer comments there. And it's really nice to see the developers being really active in the comment section, responding to people, clarifying things. That is really, really nice to see. And it's something that I wish we had a bit more of in Imperator. Of course, there was definitely dev comments, but nowhere near as many. I think the Hearts of Iron devs do a really good job of this as well, at really, responding to comments. And it's really, really nice to see the Vicky devs do the same. But yeah, thank you all very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, like button, sub, so you get more Vicky 3 news and updates in the future. And yeah, I'll see you in the future. Bye-bye.